This Freedom Stories discussion is being recorded for use by the International Storytelling Center, ISC. This recording will be owned and managed by ISC and will be used for any educational purpose that ISC deems appropriate. By participating in this public discussion, you acknowledge this recording and its subsequent uses. Closed captioning is not available for this live stream. However, closed captioning will be available on the recording, which will be uploaded to the ISC website and YouTube channel following this community conversation. Freedom Stories, Unearthing the Black Heritage of Appalachia is proudly supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities and produced by the International Storytelling Center.
I'm gonna jump the fence and wash my face in the creek, but I'm black myself. I wanna sweep that cow right off her feet, but I'm black myself. Tired of walking around with no shoes on, but I'm black myself. Your precious God ain't gonna bless me, cause I'm black myself. Is he washing the blood of your shadow? Cause I live right away. When they stop shipping workhorses, break your own anyway. I don't pass the test of the paper bag, cause I'm black myself. I pick the banjo up and they sneer at me, cause I'm black myself. You better lock your door when I walk by, cause I'm black myself. You look me in my eyes, but you don't see me, cause I'm black myself. They're washing the blood of the shadow, cause I live right away. When they stop shipping workhorses, they break their own anyway. I don't creep around, I stand proud and free, cause I'm black myself. I go anywhere that I wanna go, cause I'm black myself. I'm surrounded by many loving arms, cause I'm black myself. I stand my ground and smile in your face, cause I'm black myself. I washed away my blood and tears. I've been born brand new. There's no more workhorses, but there's still work to do.
Well, hello and welcome. Hello and welcome. My name is Kiran Singh Sirar, and I'm the president of the International Storytelling Center here in Jonesboro, Tennessee. On behalf of all of us, we welcome you today, live from Tennessee's oldest town, the storytelling capital of the world, as part of the first Digital Freedom Stories discussion. We'd like to thank the National Endowment for Humanities for their support for the Freedom Stories project. Freedom Stories is a series of humanities conversations to help illuminate the often neglected aspects of African Americans' experiences and history in Appalachia, and to help us understand this history as part of our nation's history, including the role that the art of storytelling and storytellers have played in the struggle, independence, and the shaping of a distinct American tradition and culture that we also celebrate today as part of our nation's story. We want to celebrate these stories not just for educational purposes, but also to honor the unsung heroes and sheroes of African American history. This project will produce a series of multimedia learning resources that will be made available to national audiences from our website, including this recording, which you can visit at storytellingcenter.net. In 2004, Lonnie Bunch, who at the time was president of the Chicago Historical Society, said something then that has stayed with me and influenced so much of how I saw the world around me. He said, "We cannot even begin to discuss or understand racism today without first grappling with the legacies of slavery, yet few people actually want to discuss it." Mr. Bunch went on to become the first director of the Smithsonian African American Museum and is now the Secretary General of the largest museum and research complex in the world, and we are proud to be a Smithsonian affiliate partner. Mr. Bunch's words are important now as they were back then. To understand the story of a nation is to understand the myriad of stories which make up our nation. We cannot fully understand who we are, where we come from, or where we are going unless we are willing to engage with all the stories, the whole narrative. Discussions like this one we are having today aim to lead us to a deeper public appreciation of the idea that each and every one of our stories, complex, nuanced, poignant, difficult, celebrated, and unique stories make up the whole of who we are. And through our understanding our past, we get to understand our present. And most importantly, we get to explore, through safe dialogue, the story of the nation and the world we wish to see. There is no single story that makes up this nation. Understanding the stories of struggles for freedom, equality, and justice can help us bridge divides and even strengthen our democracy. Storytelling itself offers a shared experience through which we get to see the breadth of our shared humanity, a key foundation for building a better world. Freedom Stories. The project does not just look at our past to help us understand our present, it also invites us to look at our future. As this nation prepares to commemorate its 250th anniversary in 2026, Freedom Stories offers underexamined histories we consider part of our cultural heritage. As my friend and Jonesboro Alderman, Mr. Adam Dixon, and director of our historic African American Langston School suggests, there is a traceable line from slavery to Jim Crow to what is going on in America through right now to in the wake of George Floyd's death. It's such a critical piece of our identity, even as Americans. And so when we're able to recognize it, when we're able to address it in its totality, then I think we're able to move forward as a society. The Freedom Stories Project is an attempt to do just that. And so with today's session, I ask you to ask yourselves, how does what I hear today help me experience a fuller narrative of the story of my nation, my humanity? And as you listen today, I invite you also to do so with an open mind. We also encourage you to put your questions in the chat so we can have a respectful dialogue. So it's my honor to welcome the International Storytelling Center's Director of the Freedom Stories Project, Dr. Alicestyne Turley. Dr. Turley will be facilitating this session. Now, to offer a little bit of a background for those that have yet to meet and hear from the incomparable Dr. Turley. Born in Hazard, Kentucky, and prior to becoming an educator and public historian, Dr. Turley has worked in law enforcement as a community organizer and was the first African-American administrator for the city of Toledo's first woman mayor, Donna Owens. She is also the founding director of the Carter G. Woodson Center for Interracial Education at Berea College, a longtime scholar of history, political science, sociology, and anthropology. She obtained a master's degree from Mississippi State University in public policy and from the University of Kentucky in American history, where she also graduated with a Doctor of Philosophy in American history. She describes storytelling is as American as apple pie and very much part of the African American and Appalachian life, culture, and community. We are truly honored to have Dr. Turley's experience and expertise, and as the director of Freedom Stories. I will now hand it over to her, and she will begin and introduce the Freedom Stories session with our distinguished speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen, for that wonderful introduction, as well as the support, lending your support and staff for the International Storytelling Freedom Project in producing today's discussion. I am Alicestyne Turley, currently serving as the project director for the International Storytelling Center Freedom Stories Project. Originally, our planned discussions on various Black Appalachian topics were scheduled to be presented to live audiences throughout the region, beginning with this public discussion and ending in September 2021. However, discussions have been moved because of the COVID epidemic. We've been affected by that, just as all others have in the nation. And as we move forward, we will continue to present them in a virtual format here on the International Storytelling Center's website and on a virtual platform, which we hope will be accessible to the general public and everyone will take advantage of, in many ways allowing us to reach a larger audience. This year's high quality performances and discussions will be a model for all the other upcoming storytelling events that we plan to present each month. And it will follow the basic format that we're previewing for you today. So I encourage you to watch the International Storytelling Center website to get dates and times of future public discussions. And I also encourage you to go on Facebook, our Facebook page, and type in any questions that you have. If you would like to direct them to a specific panelist, please do so. If you would like to review today's discussions at a future date or share it with others, please note that the recording of today's discussions are available on the International Storytelling Center website, as well as YouTube. And we do, from this point forward, we will be presenting for educators and the general public a Freedom Stories toolkit where these resources will remain available to you. Now, here to share her Appalachian Freedom Story is the National Endowment for the Arts 2019 National Heritage Fellow, Mama Linda Goss, joining us via audio. Mama Linda is the co-founder and former president of the nation's premier Black Storytelling Association, the National Association of Black Storytellers. Now, please listen and enjoy A Black Story of Appalachia as presented by Appalachian storyteller, Mama Linda Goss.
Peace and blessings, everyone. Peace and blessings. My bells are ringing. Can you hear them? I am the bell ringer. I am the praise singer. Doing a little truth dwelling, doing a little storytelling. Well, oh, well, well. Well, oh, well, well. It's storytelling time. Now, I've been ringing these bells for over 45 years. And I ring these bells for a reason. I ring these bells to wake up the people. I ring these bells for the homeless, the hopeless, the hungry, and the poor. I ring these bells for the voiceless, the helpless. I ring these bells for all living creatures throughout the cosmic universe. Black lives have always mattered because all lives matter. And if all lives matter, then Black lives matter. That's philosophy 101. Or as Granddaddy Murphy used to say, that's just common sense. So gather around, my people. Gather around and help me sing this welcome song. I want you to clap your hands and jump right in and just do your thing. I got the tambourines now. And just sing along with me. Gather round, my people, well, well. Gather round, my people, well, well. Gather round, my people, well, 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 well. Come on. Ooh, ah, ooh, ah. Come on. Ooh, ah, ooh, ah. Gather round, my people, well, well. Gather round, my people, well, well. Gather round, my people, well, 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 well. Well, good people, I was born in the late 40s, 1940s, and I was born and raised in the foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains in Alcoa, Tennessee. Now, all I have to do is just close my eyes, and I can see that morning mist on top of those Smokies, and I can see that shiny Tennessee River. Now, my family and I, my husband and children, have lived up and down the East Coast for many years. In Washington, D.C., now we live in Baltimore, B-more, but we used to live in Philly. And in Philly, I would drive back and forth from Philadelphia to Tennessee. Now, that drive is over 640 miles each way. Wow. Now, in 1985, I wrote this praise poem about the drive, about going down home, and it's called There Is a Place. Just close your eyes if you want to, and just listen, and you can imagine your memories of home. There is a place where I can go when I'm tired and feeling so low. It's called Alcoa, down in Tennessee, where Mom and Dad are waiting there for me. Now, I don't even have to write, let them know I'm coming. I don't have to write, don't even have to phone. All I do is just go back home, back to Alcoa, down in Tennessee, where Mom and Dad are waiting there for me. Tennessee, mountain green, morning dew, Dad is smiling, and Mom's cooking beef stew. Tennessee, mountain green, morning dew, how I do love you. Yes, I do. Well, sometime early in the morning, I jump in the car from Philly, and I'm heading on 76 West, and then on to 81 South. I'm getting tired now, so I stop at Cousin Sharon's house to get a little bite to eat and a little rest. But the next morning, I'm back on 81 South to 40 West. Oh, Lord, I hope I don't get stuck behind a transfer truck. Oh, that's better. Driving through rows and rows of trees, on top of rows and rows of hills, inhaling a sweet mountain breeze. Oh, I must confess, these magic moments I appreciate the best. Now from 40 West, it's on to Alcoa Highway 129. Now, I don't have to pack a suitcase. I don't need a bag. I don't need no money when I go home. I don't need a dime. Well, from Alcoa Highway on to Hall Road, and then past Pistol Creek, memories of childhood is what I seek. Past the train tracks, make a left on Bell. Can't wait to see them. Can't wait to see my folks because I got so much to tell. Oh, there's old St. Paul A&Me Paul Church, St. Paul A&Me. There it is up there on the hill. Folks call Dad Junior. Folks call Mom Bill. Tennessee, mountain green, morning dew. Dad is forever smiling. Mom is forever cooking beef stew. Tennessee, how I love you. Yes, I do. Fried apples, grits, and collard greens. Candy sweets, potatoes, mac and cheese. Woo! And pinto beans. Hush puppies, catfish, black-eyed peas, and corn. I say, and cornbread. I can tell you one thing. Us young'uns sure was well fed. Tennessee, morning dew, mountain green. Oh, that morning dew. How I love you. Yes, I do. Well, Dad passed away in 1990, and Mama passed away in 2002. She was a beloved school teacher whose motto was, everybody's got talent, something they can bring to the welcome table. Now, Daddy worked for the Alcoa Aluminum Company of America at the North Plant. And his father, Granddaddy Murphy, worked at the South Plant, also known as the pot room. Those big hot pots were the size of huts. They contained melted aluminum. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, heading for the freedom land. Now I went to a segregated school, grades 1st through 12th. They didn't have kindergarten back then. Name of my school was Charles M. Hall, named after the man who invented a cheaper way of processing aluminum. Now, during the 1960s, when I was in high school, my history teacher, Mrs. Helen Harris, oh, she was the best history teacher I ever had. She gave the class a homework assignment. She said, now go out and interview the oldest person in your family and ask them to tell you a story and bring that story back to the class. Well, now, first person I thought of was Granddaddy Murphy. Granddaddy Murphy McNear. So I went to him right away and asked him about telling me a story. Well, Granddaddy was born in the 1890s in Brundridge, Alabama. He came to Alcoa around 1924 with his wife, my grandmother, May Liza, and his son, my daddy, Willie McNear. Now, the closest city to Brundridge, because Brundridge is a little place, is Dothan. Dothan's on the south, and Montgomery and Birmingham are to the northwest. Well, Granddaddy smiled. He kind of chuckled a little bit. He said, you mean your school teacher wants a story from me? I could see that he felt so proud he was being asked such a question, because Granddaddy Murphy never went to school. He couldn't read or write, but I can tell you one thing, he was one of the smartest men I ever knew. Well, now, he said, I'm going to tell you something about your grandpappy, old George. Now, what does that make him if he's my granddaddy? What does that make him to you? Now, I thought about it, and I said, well, he would be my great-great-grandfather. That's right, he said. He's your great-great-great-grandpappy. Old George. Now, he was born around the 1850s, I would say. And because, you know, folks didn't keep good records back then on black folks, so we don't really know when he was born. But he was born in Brundridge, Alabama. And the reason why he was called Old George, because he was born big. He was a huge baby. As a child, he looked grown. And I believe what Granddaddy Murphy was saying, because Granddaddy was a big man. He stood at least 6 feet 5 inches and weighed over 250 pounds, and you better not mess with him either. Well, Old George was born into slavery times, and he hated it. Old Massa put him to work time he could talk. They had him rolling, pushing, pulling, lifting, sifting, hauling, carrying, chopping, plowing, planting, picking, cleaning, scrubbing, washing, and digging, and so forth, and so on, and so forth, and so on, from sun up to sundown. And if the overseer didn't like what old George did or how he did it, he would punch him. He was punched, and he would beat him, and he was whipped. He would kick him, and he was knocked upside the head, and they just hit him all over his body. And the place on that plantation, the place where the enslaved folks lived, it was something terrible. They had to sleep in little huts, but they slept on the damp ground. And Lord have mercy, there was plenty of sickness. Oh, George said the folks had all kinds of fevers and infections. Little children were covered in sores, tetter, and ringworm in their heads. Folks had all kinds of rashes all over their bodies, and their legs, some of their legs looked like they had gangrene on it. Many babies were born, but they died after a few days. Folks had consumption, or what we call TB or the flu. They had whooping cough and measles and rheumatism. And even when old George was sick or had a knee injury, he still had to work, or he'd be whipped or slapped around. So one night, he just took off. Old George ran away. You might say he was a one-man underground railroad. A few days before, he had hidden a knapsack and a bamboo fishing pole in the woods. His knee was aching, but he hopped away as fast as he could, in no particular direction, just straight ahead as far as he could go from slavery. He wanted to get away. He had to get away. He was only about 11 or 12 years old when he ran away. But old George knew he had to do it. George, oh George, where did you run to? George, oh George, where did you run to? Old George hopped as fast as he could. He ran so fast, he came so tired that he fell into a gully. And when he woke up, he jumped up and kept running and running and running and hopping again, running to freedom. Well, after many days, he found a cave. Now, he was afraid to go in that cave because there might be a bear and her cubs in there. So he threw a rock in there and ran, but nothing happened. He threw a larger rock in there and thought, well, if a bear comes out and if it's time for me to die, Lord, I'd rather be mauled to death by a bear than shot in the head by old Massa. So old George took a chance, and he crawled in that cave. And the cave was much bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. George stood up, and he could see some light coming through the cracks at the top of the cave. Old George looks around, and he saw something that made him stumble backwards. He saw a pile of bones. Actually, it was a skeleton. And there was a skull laying in some long silver white hair. The clothes were tattered with just bits of cloth and a lot of dust. Oh, good heavens, George said. Oh, my God, oh, my God. Now, near the body was a tomahawk and some baskets, some sticks and stones, tools to make a fire. George reckoned that this had been a Cherokee man or a Creek man, but that body had been there for such a long time, for many, many years. Well, old George said, well, I don't think this body going to bother me, so I'm just going to spend the night here. And that he did. He stared at them bones, and as they say, he kept one eye open and one eye shut. Now, he stayed in that cave for some time. And then one day there was a rainfall, and the ground was wet enough, so old George went out and got some rocks and dug up a hole and buried the man. He placed dirt and branches and leaves and thick mud and rocks on top of the grave. And that cave was now old George's home. George, oh George, where did you run to? George, oh George, where did you run to? Wanna live on my own, gonna live all alone. Ain't gonna be no slave, I'd rather live in a cave. George, oh George, where did you run to? Now, in order to stay alive, old George had to eat whatever he could get his hands on. He would catch some fish, and he would hunt and catch some squirrel, possum, chipmunk, rabbit. Now, he caught mostly and ate rabbits and hares, but he also ate gophers and a snake, raccoon, grasshopper, blackberries, wild grapes, honeysuckles. Now, he didn't mess with no polecat. He didn't mess with no toads either, or no toadstools. He didn't know too much about mushrooms. Well, old George really didn't keep track of how long he stayed in that cave. But after some time, he felt it was time to move on. In case, people got suspicious, in case somebody walked through there and saw the cave. Now, old George loved trees, and he loved to climb them. And he found a favorite tree, an old, tall tree with strong branches. And he got some vine and some twine, and he wrapped it around himself in that tree, and he climbed up that tree, and he stayed there for some time. Now, old George said he never saw any bears or any mountain lions, but during the night, he would hear all kinds of animal sounds. Or he would hear mountain lions way off in the distance, thanks goodness. He would hear bobcats and owls and wolves and wild dogs. But he stayed up in that tree. And during the day, he could see a plantation from the tree. So one night, he snuck up to that plantation, and he set the barn on fire. But he drove the horses out of the barn before he lit the fire. And then he yelled, "Fire! Fire!" When folks ran out, old George ran into the kitchen and took as much food as he could. And then he ran off as quickly as he could, because he didn't want to get anybody in trouble, especially himself. George, oh George, where did you run to? George, oh George, where did you run to? Like an owl I'll find a nest. During the day I'll take my rest. At night I'll make my rounds. Don't want to wake up them hounds. George, oh George, where did you run to? George, oh George, where did you run to? Well, old George, my great-great-grandpappy, lost track of time. Days turned into months, months turned into years. But one day he heard some loud, very loud, strange-sounding sounds. It sounded like screaming and shouting and yelling and hollering. He climbed up his tree to look out, but he couldn't see anything. But he sensed that something great had happened, some kind of great occurrence or some great change had come. So he just started running in the direction where the sounds were coming from. And he ran as fast as he could. He ran a few miles. And once he had stopped running, he realized that he was on the same plantation where he had run away from many years ago. Oh, the black folks were just out in the fields. They were celebrating and singing and shouting and crying and dancing and praying and rejoicing. But the little children started screaming and pointing at George, and they ran away from him. George didn't realize how scary he looked. Leaves and twigs and vines and hanging from his hair, his clothes in rags. He hadn't spoken to a human being in years, so he didn't say anything. And an old woman walked up to him. Some of the men grabbed some rocks and some sticks in case he was crazy. But the old woman looked right into his eyes, and she said, "It's all right. It's okay. It's old George, the McNair's son, the one we all thought was dead. But he's come home now. He's alive." And she said, "Old George, slavery is over. George, we's all free. But you know, we ain't got no place to go. And old master is dead. So some of us gonna have to stay right here and work the land for old missus." And she said she would try to give us something. But George, you's free. George, oh George, where did you run to? George, oh George, where did you run to? Been out here all these years, done forgot what my name is. Don't know how old I am, but I know I am a free man. 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 George McNair became a free man. George McNair, my great-great-granddaddy. I've known some Georges in my time. George Washington, first president of the United States. George Washington Williams, great black historian and soldier. George Washington Carver, great scientist and inventor. And George Perry Floyd Jr., a man, a black man who touched the world. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Lord, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Thank you so much. I hope you have enjoyed what I have shared with you, and storytelling, whatever you like today, please take it back and share it with someone else. Pass it on down as my family has passed on stories to me, and pass your stories down. That's how we know what happens, not from necessarily the history books, but from the plain folks, the ordinary folks, stuff that's in the scrapbook, stuff that has been passed on down from generation to the next generation.
Thank you, Mama Linda, for that freedom story, Appalachian freedom story. I am now pleased to introduce our distinguished panel to continue the discussion about Black life in Appalachia. Today, we are joined by Associate Professor of History, radio host, and Executive Director of the Office of Community Engagement at University of North Carolina, Asheville, Dr. Darin J. Waters. Welcome, Dr. Waters.
Thank you.
We are also joined by Harlan, Kentucky native, retired Berea College Distinguished Professor of Black and Appalachian Studies, Dr. William H. Turner. And although he lists himself as retired, Dr. Turner continues to consult for nonprofit serving marginalized communities, as well as the Director of Education for the Appalachian African American Cultural Center in Pennington Gap, Virginia. Welcome, Dr. Turner. Professor of Sociology, internationally recognized scholar in the areas of inequality and violence, as an author, a lecturer, and world traveler from Southern Illinois University. We're pleased to welcome Edwardsville. We're pleased to welcome Dr. Sandra Weissinger. Welcome, Dr. Weissinger.
Thanks so much.
2020 Berea College graduate, Alona Norwood. Alona is Berea College Peace and Social Justice major, community activist, and board member of the New Generation Freedom Fighters based in Johnson City, Tennessee. Currently, Ms. Norwood is actively engaged on the front line of protest in the Tri-City region. Welcome, Ms. Norwood. We are joined also by Professor of History, Gender Studies, and African American Studies at East Tennessee State University, Dr. Elwood Watson. Dr. Watson is an author, public commentator for such organizations as Diverse Education, Huffington Post, Good Men's Project, and a commenter on blackpast.org. Welcome, Dr. Watson. So to begin the conversation, I would like to ask each of you, beginning with Dr. Waters, your view of our primary question. From your perspective, do Black Lives Matter in Appalachia?
Well, first, thank you, Dr. Turley. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing through the International Storytelling Center. And I want to thank the International Storytelling Center for this project and for hosting this panel. I also want to acknowledge that I'm very honored to be here with my colleagues on this panel to discuss this. Mama Linda's story was a very powerful story. I have had the great privilege of being able to listen to powerful stories all my life. One of the things that I would mention here is that from my mentors, beginning with my grandfather, Mr. Isaiah Rice, all the way down to include John Hope Franklin and Dr. William Turner, who is on this panel, I have been taught that one of the things that we need to do is to take the time to listen to other people's stories. And you learn something of value from that experience. But to your question about Black lives and Black lives, do Black Lives Matter in Southern Appalachia, as a native of this region, having been born and raised here in Asheville, North Carolina, the answer to that question is yes, absolutely. Black Lives Matter in Southern Appalachia. But as I think about that, the thing that comes to mind is, but whether or not others have been willing to recognize that is another question altogether. However, I want to say that I believe that it is important to note and say that while some have not always been willing to recognize the value of Black life, are the Black experience in this region. And I think here of some of the people who laid the groundwork for Appalachian studies, like John C. Campbell and John Belcher, who essentially dismissed the African-American experience in this region in their earlier works on the region. That while they may not have seen the value of the Black experience here, the one thing that I have recognized from the people who taught me, and I think here primarily not only of my own parents, but my grandparents in particular, and my two grandfathers, Isaiah Rice and Edgar L. Waters Sr., that the one thing that I gathered and I gained from them was that while others may not have recognized the value of Black life in their lives, they always recognized the value of it. And they imparted that to me, and it's something that I am very grateful that I've been able to impart to my own sons. I would also say that as a professional historian, I believe that the challenge that has been before us is really to tell that story, to incorporate it into the narrative, the larger narrative, not only of Southern Appalachia, but of the country in general. It has been too long unrecognized. That contribution and that history has been too long unrecognized. And I think that it's incumbent upon me here to acknowledge the work of people like Dr. Turner and his colleague from years ago, Ed Cabell, who really, I believe, laid the groundwork for the work that I've been able to do on the history of African Americans in Southern Appalachia, in particular, specifically looking at Western North Carolina. I think that work was absolutely important. It staked a claim in the intellectual framework of Southern Appalachia studies about the Black presence. And so we have to acknowledge the work that they have done. That work has been foundational to the work of so many others, as I have acknowledged here. We've been able to uncover so much of what the African-American experience has been here. And I could tell many, many stories that are similar to the stories that Mama Linda told. So in closing, and not to take up too much time here, I would say absolutely, absolutely, Black lives do matter here in Southern Appalachia. And we need to continue to do the work to actually tell that story and incorporate it into the larger narrative of this region. And that work is being done.
Thank you so much for those comments. Dr. Turner, you could not have had a better setup. From your many years of experience in teaching and being involved in the community, do Black Lives Matter in Appalachia?
Thank you very much, Alicestyne. Well, for me, to ask the question, do Black Lives Matter, gets to a real fundamental, almost like existential, should we exist or do we exist? And I don't want to argue that too much, because I think we've been here, we've done this. So I was turning 20 years old when Black people not only said they mattered, they said they were beautiful. And Black is beautiful was something that was ingrained in my head in the 60s. And like Mama Goss mentioned, I was born in Harlan County, Kentucky at the end of the Second World War. And it was a very autonomous community. It was one of those situations where segregation was how you were nourished. So I never had a problem thinking that I mattered to anybody, didn't worry too much. I knew I mattered. We knew that the religion that we most attached to taught us that a long time ago, and nobody could take that. But personally, I'm just delighted because I see this uptick in the interests of Black people in Appalachia. So much so, for example, in the last 25, 30 years, I've seen people who are not even from the region, but they identify so much so that they become a brand of that region. So now, after all these years, we've been looking at this, we see people who have no lived experiences in Appalachia. But their writing is, they'll call it Afro-Latchin. There's one fellow there in Asheville, he calls himself a Black Appalachian. And then we have some others who label themselves as Afro-Latchins. And there are people who are Asia Latins now, and there are people who are Expect-Latins. You go on and on. And I'm just glad after all these years to see it. Because if we go back to Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, he is an Appalachian. And even before him, going back to the presence with Africans amidst the Spanish explorers who came into the region of Southern Appalachia 100 years before Blacks came to Port Connor, Virginia. In the 1500s, there were Blacks in Appalachia. The first Blacks in Appalachia lived with the Cherokees, and they lived with the Creek. And they were right there near where you guys are in Jonesville, right over the hill in Maggie Valley, and Culloway, and Cherokee, and in that part of the world. And so there were all these emancipationists, abolitionists who started out in East Tennessee, right there in Jonesville, and they influenced Frederick Douglass. So Appalachia is writ large with the Black presence and how much we matter. Go back to what the first real Black nationalist, his name was Martin Delany. Martin Delany, I commend people to read about Martin Delany of West Virginia, Booker T. Washington, Carter G. Woodson, all of these people. So when you look at entertainment and industry and education and whatever, Black people have always been very large in Appalachia. And I'm glad to see a lot of people begin to realize that. Alex Haley, who ended up writing about roots that got us all on that trail, was laid to rest in Appalachia because he moved into East Tennessee. He loved it so much. And so I'm just glad to see things where they are right now in terms of the accumulation of interest in Black people in Appalachia. And these stories, oh Lord, I could never tell the stories I heard of my grandma, because my grandma was a bootlegger. So in Harlan County, where I grew up, they wouldn't call it storytellers, they were just flat out lies sometimes. But they was also part of the culture. And I appreciate that very much. It nourished me in a way that I would never want to try it any other way.
Thank you so much for those comments. we definitely need to talk about the bootlegging aspect of Appalachia.
That's what the stories are told.
Dr. Weissinger, you're joining us from Illinois, but I know that you teach and write on these topics. So have you, from your perspective, living outside the region, do you think Black lives matter in Appalachia?
Firstly, I just want to thank you for having me with this panel of esteemed colleagues. Writing from Illinois, I also have the lived experience of living in other regions of the United States. But to your question, do Black lives matter, specifically in Appalachia? I'd like to perhaps ask a different question. So when I think of Black lives and them mattering, I go back to Ms. Patrice, who is a co-founder for Black Lives Matters. And I remember that when she penned that or wrote it and typed it up on the internet, it was not a question, it was a statement. It was an affirmation. It was a rallying call. She was writing to her co-founder, Ms. Garza, and she was saying, Black Lives Matter, sis. They absolutely do. And so this affirmation to me, it's what we always have to look back to and keep in the front of our mind. It is a statement of our humanity in times that are inhumane. She said this when we saw Trayvon Martin murdered and his murderer led to walk out. This murderer went on to sign Skittles bags at gun shops and to do so for fame and fortune. So I want to spin it. I don't think the question should be, do Black lives matter? No disrespect, of course. I'd rather talk about, to what extent do Black lives matter? Or, and my humanist friends are going to hate me for this, what value is placed on Black life, okay? Now, if we want to think about it that way, there's no question, Black lives have always mattered. They mattered when they were put on those ships and taken through the Middle Passage. They mattered when they were sold for chattel slavery. They mattered when it came time for who could have wealth in this country, who could own property. They matter today when we look at the wage and the wealth gaps that still persist in this day and age. And certainly they matter regardless of what institutions and companies want to co-sign on them mattering. For me right now, it's very interesting to see all the corporations and companies that are now signing on to say that Black lives matter, where they did not sign on when we saw what was happening with Trayvon Martin. They did not sign on when we saw what was happening in Ferguson, to the extent that even the work of the Ferguson Commission has not yet fully been carried out. So this question about, do Black lives matters? Oh, wow, it's amazing how 3 minutes passed. Let me go ahead and get to my ending because I wanted to make sure I put this back in Appalachia. I love the internet because it introduces me to young folks who are doing amazing things. And I'm trying to give a good introduction to you, my friend, who's coming up next. I found a group called Black Appalachian Young and Rising Group. And I think that they answer this question very well. So for the original question, do Black lives matter? They say, our lives involve a history and current reality of brilliance and struggle. The complexities are many, but connections guides our celebration of Blackness and also our strategy for change. Our beautiful existence intersects with state violence and erasures amongst systems of racism and economic injustice. Yes, they matter.
Thank you so much. And again, Ms. Norwood, good setup for Young Lives and what you're doing on the ground. So as a young scholar, community activist, and in your opinion and lived experience in today's Appalachia, how are you feeling about Black lives mattering where you are from?
So it's very similar to, you know, what the other panelists have said. Of course, Black lives matter. I mean, I am a Black life and I value myself. But when you look at the world around you, it's really hard to say Black Lives Matter when Black people are 3 times as likely to be arrested than their white counterparts for the same crime. And there's a clear lack of representation in the public school systems. I mean, my first Black formal educator was in undergrad, freshman year. And to have a Black educator literally changed my whole perspective on education. So for me, yeah, Black lives do matter in Appalachia. It's just hard to feel like they matter as a Black person at times, because there's just so many forms of oppression that we're experiencing. But for me, proclaiming Black Lives Matter in Appalachia is important because you don't usually correlate Black folk with the Appalachian region. And so in my own experience, I've been questioned, like, you're from Appalachia? And it's like, I'm just as country as you. Like, do you not hear that in my voice? Like, do you not hear the twang? And, I've had people just be really confused whenever I say I'm from Carter County and it's a little tiny town in the mountains. But, as a biracial woman, I'll never be Black enough and I'll never, ever be white. So I've had to kind of grapple with my existence as half Black and half white. And it's been difficult because whenever you share your personal experiences of Blackness, that lived experience becomes the epitome of what it means to be Black to those white peers that you're sharing yourself with. And so by being biracial, I'm able to code switch and be in this unique position to relate to my white friends and family, but then also be able to learn more about the Black experience. And so simply putting it, Black lives do matter, not just in Appalachia, but in society as a whole. And I'm proclaiming that my Black life matters because I'm a living, breathing human being who deserves respect and fair treatment. And this critical conversation that we're having right now and all across the country, quite frankly, is really important to break through those stereotypes of there not being Black people in the Appalachian region and our lives not mattering. As I stated before, Blackness is not a monolith, and there are brown and Black people that have always lived in the Appalachian Mountains, and there are going to be more people to come. So we must normalize diversity amongst ourselves, and then maybe the world around us will begin to understand why Black lives matter.
All right, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Watson, as a scholar and a teacher of young minds like Miss Norwood at East Tennessee State University, what is your perspective on Black Lives Matter?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I was very, very impressed with what I've heard with everybody today. Such eloquent commentary and very, very passionate and sincere, authentic commentary. And I'm glad to be a part of this, certainly panel and symposium. That being said, do Black Lives Matter? Yes and no. Yes to those of us who are African American or African descent and believe that all lives are worth of humanity as well. But I would have to say, for some people, particularly many who are not Black, and particularly those who are white, a segment of white America, or a segment of white people in general, internationally, no. It is clear that Black lives do not have the same value with some of these individuals, as we saw with the recent murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and the list could go on and on and on. No, to these individuals, Black lives do not matter, and I don't think Black people, quite frankly, in minds of certain whites, to be blunt, are seen as fully human. That is largely due to the historical devaluations, dehumanization, and denigration of Black people of Black African descent. We were brought to this country against our will, largely, and slave labor. We were not compensated for it. We were exploited, mistreated, in some cases, men and women sexually violated, women raped, all of us denied our human dignity, robbed of our religion, our diet, our culture, our language, our name, and then basically our entire humanity. This has been going on, and it has been modified and altered in different ways since the 17th century. So these values, and I use that term values loosely, that have been passed on to many other whites from generation to generation, have all been less than human toward people of African descent. So I would say for some people, no, Black lives do not matter. Black lives are seen as pretty much indifferent. For Black people, of course, we see Black lives that matter. We realize we're human beings. We're fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers, children, adults, and many, many other things that other people of all races are. In the Appalachian region, I've been here since 1997, and I've been here for pretty much almost a quarter of a century. I came to Appalachia, and Appalachia in itself is a very unique area. I consider Tennessee this part of Tennessee, not necessarily the South. It is the South geographically, but as far as the culture, the music, and others, is it a Memphis? No. Is it the Deep South? No. But it does have its own unique flavor. And like anywhere else, racism does exist.
So let's talk about that if we can stay on that subject, particularly with the experience of Dr. Turner and the experience of a younger, new generation protester, because protest is not new to the region of Appalachia. First of all, I think it's important to state that it always has been seen as an area of protest and division on many levels, whether it's labor, whether it's issue of slavery. Dr. Turner, from having worked and lived and taught and lectured in the region, and looking at what you see happening with young people today in the region, do you think the region is improving? Do you think people are getting the message that change is coming and is here? Or are we still struggling with historic issues?
I think we all agree that Malcolm X was right a long time ago. That's why I don't want us to pull Appalachia out as though it's some other part of America. Malcolm X was once asked about the difference between racism and prejudice and the manifestations of white privilege, whether you were in the North or the South. And Malcolm used to say, don't talk about the South. Anywhere south of the Canadian border is South. So in the sense that really is a true statement. People didn't like to hear it, but it was always just a matter of, did you have a little more human treatment in California as opposed to Arkansas, as opposed to Florida, as opposed to Nova Scotia? And everybody knew it's best to go across the border. So as long as you're in the United States, the nature of racism, they used to say that slavery was benevolent in Appalachia vis-a-vis slavery in Mississippi. Now, what is benevolent slavery? Slavery is slavery. So Appalachia just had fewer slaves. And the part where I grew up in Eastern Kentucky in Harlan County is a prime example of how there are so many different parts of Appalachia. Darin grew up in Asheville, Buncombe County. The people who built the Biltmore Estates, and on the other side of the mountain, so to speak, as crow flies, the people that I came from, many of whom came out of central Alabama, around Jefferson County, Alabama. They moved into central Appalachia because there was no great number of slaves already in there. And so after the Industrial Revolution, the 1880s, lots and lots of blacks came. But, you know, we talked earlier about the place was just a hotbed for labor strife, as you mentioned, in Matewan, West Virginia. The John Henry legend was all about whether they were going to have a machine replace the men and the men that would get replaced with the black coal miners. And then there was a Highlander Center in East Tennessee, people who came in there, Rosa Parks, Dr. King, the SNCC, everybody came to East Tennessee, to the Highlander Center in the 50s. the whites have always engaged out in the streets like they did during Black Lives Matter a month ago. White people in the mountains of the South. Remember John Henry, for example, not John Henry, I'm sorry, excuse me, in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, John Brown.
John Brown.
Yeah, that was a white man who said we need to take a militant approach to this slavery, and he enlisted some black folk. So you see, it's struggle, different levels of it, from one end of the extreme to what would a method be, to the other end of the extreme, another type of method. It all manifests in the Appalachian region. In the words of the Appalachian Regional Commission, Birmingham is in Alabama.
Right.
I'm sorry, in Appalachia.
Appalachia. People overlook Birmingham as part of that coal mining and iron industry chain. But Alona, as a young or the new generation freedom fighter,
right,
what has been productive for you looking at the history of it, and what do you think the young people are now willing to shed for the sake of the new generation of protests?
So the first thing I want to comment on is just the way that we have been organizing in general. It's been very, like, I don't want to say spur of the moment for lack of sounding unorganized, but in like this digital age of 2020, like if you post too much stuff ahead of time, things can like be interfered with and stuff like that. There's always a camera rolling no matter where you go. Like even if you're filming yourself, like there's so much documentation versus like how the old school organizers were going about it. I feel like media attention, it was very like strategic, and you had to like really put in an effort to document what was going on. But now there's like almost this higher level of accountability because someone somewhere is going to be filming you. Like I've seen so many pictures of myself and videos, and I had no idea I was being filmed or a picture being taken of me. And so I guess to go back to your question of like, what are we willing to shed? I think for a lot of us, it's our privacy. And a lot of it has to really be our pride, because we want to act a certain way, and, you know, we want to be loud and get a little wild at times. But the more that we're organizing, we're having to learn that like sometimes you do have to play the game, because a lot of the decision makers that we're speaking with are from an older generation. And so whenever we're coming at them, you know, loudmouth, harsh words, no filter, it can be a little off-putting, and people may not want to listen to that. So we're having to kind of go back to the drawing board and articulate a little bit better. And it's hard for me, even as, you know, a college educated person. But I've had to be really patient in understanding that I've been very privileged to have a first class education from Berea, and not everybody has that opportunity. And so I've had to kind of balance and figure out what my place is whenever people are expressing their trauma and their oppression in ways that I'm not familiar with, because their experience as a Black person and their experience in Appalachia has been so different from my own. So I think we're kind of shedding our own personal identities and kind of trying to come together in like a form of solidarity and Blackness.
And I want to come back to that. I see that we have a few questions coming in, but I'm curious to know, Kieran, being there in Jonesboro with the International Storytelling Center, have you received any adverse reaction to your adoption of the Black Freedom Stories Project? How is Jonesboro reacting to, number one, the protest? And number two, the fact that the Storytelling Center is launching this new concept of culture in Appalachia?
Well, I think, to be upfront, 2 years ago, when we kind of came up with the idea to approach the National Endowment for Humanities, I reached out to a past board member, Dr. Rex Ellis, who was one of the chief curators for the African American Museum in Washington, D.C., and a former board member and storyteller. And he posed me a question. He says, it's important, before I support this project, you need to ask the community, do we want it? And I did. And we were inundated with letters of support. But I would say those letters of support came from the Black-White dialogue. It came from the town of Jonesboro. It came from Northeast Tennessee tourism groups, East Tennessee State University, and the people. So in a sense, I think I think people are wholly supportive of the idea of what the Freedom Stories Project aims to do. Has it met with some resistance? Yes, there's an element of that. There's, but I also say, in part, it's, a few years ago, when Dr. Bernice King was here in our region, daughter of Dr. King, and she said something that kind of stayed. She said, there's something that Donald Trump and Black Lives Matter have in common. Both have woken up this country to the great disparities that already exist. Regardless of political beliefs, I think that's true. But one thing I have noticed, when I was in Baton Rouge when Alton Sterling was killed, and one thing I noticed as a new Appalachian that claims that brand that Dr. Turner talks about, is that I've seen the systemic demonization of a legitimate movement, which I believe is actually embedded and integral to the storytelling movement. It is why, as the president of the International Storytelling Center, the National Storytelling Festival, the Freedom Stories Project is our first earmarked project towards marking the 50th anniversary of the National Storytelling Renaissance. And so, even if people don't agree, I'm afraid they're going to have to, in the sense that it's integral to the storytelling movement. And it's important, remember, this is an American tradition. And it's an African-American tradition, but it's an American tradition.
Thank you for that. And Dr. Waters, I'm going to pose this next question to you. Please, is one of our questions from the audience is, please speak to the evolution of the recognition of the diversity that has existed in Appalachia, particularly in the Black Lives Matter movement, and connecting Appalachia to the growing Latinx population in places like Morristown, Tennessee, LGBTQ, and white working class. How would you connect Black Lives Matter and our push for diversity with this movement?
It's an interesting question, Dr. Turley. I mean, it's connected. I don't have to try to make that connection. I mean, the racial demographics of this country and this region are changing, whether we like it or not. Whether some like it or not, it is going to change. And I think that it is incumbent upon us to understand the contributions that each of these groups are making to continue to develop and build this region. I think I'm listening to the comments of my colleagues on the panel, and what I'm getting here is a really good lesson of Southern Appalachia writ large. I'm here, as Bill pointed out, in Western North Carolina. And as you know, Asheville is a very, very different place. And that last question that you asked about whether or not people are beginning to accept and realize that change is occurring, you can really see that that is very palpable here in Asheville. People are very accepting of that. What I am very proud to see, and this work I think has been greatly enhanced by the work that we've been able to do through UNC Asheville and the support of that institution of higher education, is that there is a greater recognition, as I said earlier, about the historical experiences of people of color in this region. Where that was once ignored, it is now being recognized in a very, I think, a very rich and powerful way. And that's important. Me as a historian, it's important. It's our identity is fundamentally connected to that past experience. And it shapes us. And that's one of the things that I'm constantly saying. I'm known to constantly, or to often quote what the 18th century English or Irish political philosopher Edmund Burke, who once said that the world belongs to the living, the dead, and those yet to come. And I do believe that. We inherit something from those who came before us. We will shape it, and then we will pass something on to the next generation. And we need to see that great historical continuity that exists there. And as the region change, I think it will become, especially with the racial demographics as they change, it will become even more richer, and what we will pass on will be even richer. So that is the way I would respond to that question.
Thank you so much. We are getting a lot of questions that are being filtered to me. So this next question I'm going to direct to Dr. Watson. There's a question about curriculum in Appalachia from an educator. And I know you've written about teaching and how we need to improve our educational formats, especially for students attending Black students attending predominantly white institutions. So the educator is saying that I firmly believe curriculum changes are paramount to educate all students on the real history of the United States, not the whitewashed version that currently exists. Have any of you, and so I'll open this up after Dr. Watson's comments, or have any of you had any experience with policy change in the state departments of education since this movement began after the death of George Floyd? Or I would say at any point along this string, have you had any success in changing Department of Education curriculums?
Well, I know as far as changing the Department of Education's curriculum, as college professors, for the most part, we are, at least at my institution, we're given a certain degree of academic freedom. So primarily the courses that I teach, and I do a course on American ethnic and cultural history every now and then, but I also do courses in African American studies as history, because I'm also a professor of history, African American studies, and gender and sexuality studies. That being said, I pretty much, certainly include, Blacks in Appalachia in whenever I talk about African American history and African American studies, because I'm here in the region. So I do include that, incorporate that in my curriculum. But as far as, interacting with the State Department of Education, if I'm hearing the question correctly, the Tennessee State Department of Education, they're not usually too involved, with post-secondary education. So I think they would probably be more inclined to be involved with K through 12 education, because higher education would be a different dynamic. So I really can't answer that question with any effectiveness. I mean, as far as I can tell you what I do, and as far as my teaching, yes, I do include, African Americans in Appalachia in my curriculum, as well as Blacks throughout all regions of the country as well. So.
How about any of the other panelists? Have any of the departments of education asked you in your work to help them construct something that's a little more inclusive of Appalachian history? Have you had those requests come to you?
Dr. Turley, I will say here, through the work that we've done here at UNC Asheville, when I came back to Asheville, I think back in 2010, we hosted a symposium that we thought would be a one and done symposium. It's turned into a 7-year annual conference that we do on the history of African Americans in Western North Carolina and Southern Appalachia. That we had the good fortune of having that project funded by the Mellon Foundation 3 years ago. And a piece of that work is to develop curriculum from the work that is presented at that conference each year. So that work has been going on here in Asheville and in North Carolina for the past, at least as far as Southern Appalachia is concerned, has been ongoing here for the past 3 to 4 years. And so, yeah, we're seeing that. And I would also reference that early on, back in 2009, I think a number of states, Tennessee has a commission that focuses specifically on the history of African Americans in that state. North Carolina created such a commission back in 2009 called the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. It's run out of Raleigh, and it has done significant work. I was on that commission, was one of the initial members of that commission back in 2009. And one of the first things that we did with, in conjunction with the state Department of Education, was to see to it that a study of the Wilmington Race Riot in 1898 was actually published, and looking for ways to incorporate that into the curriculum in our schools. So I'm proud of the fact that North Carolina, I think, is making that effort to see to it that these stories and this experience is incorporated into the curriculum.
Thank you so much. I'm going to direct this. There's a question for you, Alona, on this from a person who wants to know, how critical is it that we invest in our Black youth after listening to your comments, and they want to know what ways can people help uplift and support you and your work in the community, in your community and in the region? What would
That's
you
a
say?
really good question. Okay, so the first part of the question, how critical is it for education for the youth? Very critical. I don't really know how to even articulate how important it is. Just a quick little story, like whenever I realized I wanted to be a peace and social justice major, it was at a moment when the professor and the rest of the class were discussing, okay, so what do we do about all of this, like all of these systematic issues? How do we fix it, right? And the only like comprehensive answer that we could give as a class, like 15 of us, was education for the youth and for the old people. Anybody willing to listen and learn, really. So it's, for me personally, education, a comprehensive education is the key to fixing, or not really fixing, but beginning to mend a lot of the issues that we do have in this country, because a lot of it is really just a lack of understanding.
And how can they help
then,
how can they help what you're doing now?
Exactly. So if they're in the area, you know, white bodies are always welcome to protect Black bodies. It's part of a power dynamic to keep each other safe. White people are just less likely to encounter violence at the hands of, you know, counter protesters or police officers. If you're not willing or able to come out to a protest, words of encouragement, resources. We have Facebook pages and things like that you guys can get connected on under New Generation Freedom Fighters. I'm closely working with and supporting the New Panther Initiative, and they are more of like a direct action kind of group, whereas my New Generation Freedom Fighters are more based on policies. So if you guys wanted to make donations of any type of like non-perishable goods, cash donations through a GoFundMe is acceptable. Anything that you could think of would be accepted.
I would interject here that your website, New Generation Freedom Fighters, can be found on the International Storytelling Center website. And I would encourage people to log on, check out your work site, the website and your work. And we're running, can you believe our time is almost gone? And one of the last questions I will get to is the idea of how can we leverage the political moment, and I'll leave this open for anyone. How can we leverage this political moment to encourage the kind of real political and economic changes that the nation needs and move beyond symbolic victories?
I would love to speak to that.
Okay.
I would love to. A couple of things. First, we have to support those young leaders who want to learn, who want support. And so certainly we've got Ms. Norwood's group that we're speaking to. And in Appalachia, we also have the Stay Project. These are young folks who want to stay in Appalachia and they want to make sure that they are leaders in their communities. They want to bring back jobs. They want to make sure that their voices are heard. And a project that they do that I find, and I'm not part of them, I get nothing for saying this.
I am.
Okay, good. So a project that they do that I really appreciate is their storytelling initiative. It's the love stories. What do you love about this region? I want to tie this into the earlier question about curriculum. How do we keep this going and not let this just be some kind of slogan fair where we come back to it again and again because more and more people are being shot and murdered? Well, the way I see it is we start at home and we build up. For us at SIUE, no, we are not necessarily changing policies for the Board of Education in Illinois. However, at our schools, we are changing our curriculum so that it is teaching folks about bias. It's teaching them about what revolutionary matters are. It's teaching them why equity matters. So for the question that you're asking, when we train young folks to be leaders, and when we make sure that they are leaders that are speaking into our institutions and going to work in those institutions, that's how we have everlasting change. But for all of you all who are listening who want to do something, keep asking questions. If your favorite coffee company decides that they want to say that Black Lives Matter, hold them to that. Don't ask them to talk. Look for what they're doing, right? I think we've got to back away from all of this talking and look at what people are doing and institutions are doing.
Thank you. Dr. Watson, I see are you wanting to respond?
Yes, I would say primarily that I think it's very, very important to take off what Dr. Weissinger Sandra said. We have to be more concerned about substance as opposed to symbolic messages. Yes, I'm well aware of the power of symbols, and I know what symbols should not totally be discounted. But a lot of times, I think we sometimes get distracted about symbols and statues and things of that nature, as opposed to real substance, which is going to really be the difference. Like, for example, recently Mars and Quaker Oats have taken they're going to get ready to Aunt Jemima picture off the pancake box, and Uncle Ben's and cream of wheat. And while all that is laudable, I think that is a good thing to do, because as far as I'm concerned, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben's, those terms are very, very condescending on many levels. As far as I'm concerned, Jemima's pancakes and Ben's rice will be just fine. But I think as far as that goes, we don't want to just get sidetracked on those type of issues. Corporations need to invest in the communities. Serious talk about reparations. I feel, as far as I'm concerned, I think there's reparations in the Black community need to be a serious talk. I think we need a Marshall Plan for our inner cities and our urban areas. I feel we need to look at, free college tuition. Our total student loan forgiveness for people of color. I think we need to have mandatory training picking back on an earlier question about the history of indigenous people and people of color in this country. So I think there are many, many ways where we could get corporations to do. Donating money is very, very good, but that is peanuts for Pepsi, Mars, Hershey, for what they make probably in a week, to give $3 or $4 million to any kind of foundation, which is good. I'm not saying that's not a bad thing, but that if that's their only gesture, that is a drop in the bucket for those companies for what they make. Okay, so that's not going to do too much financially to them as well. So many of them make that much in a day in some cases, or even certainly within 2 days. So anyway, my point is we have to look at substance and reparations. I'm a big fan of that, and also real substantive issues, employing Blacks in areas. It's one thing to say statements. The agile statement that comes out is, this is not the policy of our company, these are not the values of our company, and da da da. Well, that's good, and that is good that is the case. But what are you doing beyond that? Okay, employing Blacks in Hollywood studios, employing Blacks in corporations like Pepsi, where there are decision makers and things of that nature. That's what we have to look at: employment, and also bring in Black people from the marginalizations of economic society and from the economics of our nation and into the mainstream, that where Black people are at the table, are in decision making, and that in and of itself, I feel, is going to be far, far more important than just, rallying around symbols and things of that nature. Now, that's another whole topic within itself. Yes, I don't believe, Confederate statues and things like that should be in the public square. They should be in museums where they belong, but we need to use them as a teaching method. But let's not get too distracted about symbols alone like that, as opposed to missing the real mark, which I think has to be more substance issues, as I've just mentioned.
And with that, our time is up. So as an example of storytelling and the power of it, you can see I've got many questions here we will not get to, but feel free to continue to post the questions, and we will encourage our scholars, if they wish to respond, we'll make that possible for them to respond to you. But I also want to thank Mama Linda, our storyteller, for her Black Appalachian story, our wonderful panelists for making time in their very busy schedules to join us in the discussion, and for our listeners and viewers for tuning in to this first story public discussion. We encourage you to join us for future public discussions. If you like this one, just think we've got 11 more to go. So I hope all of you have been inspired and can appreciate the power of storytelling and plan to join us for future stories. And until next time, we'll continue to connect communities one story at a time. And stay safe and have a great holiday weekend. Thank you all for joining in.
Thank you.
Thank everybody.
Yeah, I want to check if it's still live or not. 1 second. I think it's